What crazier story do you need to tell? Years ago, I was hitchhiking north of Richmond, Virginia, when a car with two dudes picked me up. We got to chatting, and it turns out they were headed to their friend's place to shoot guns and asked me if I wanted to join. I asked if his friend would be okay with a random homeless-esque fellow shooting his guns, and he said, "Hell, just pretend to be my cousin from Seattle." So instead of sitting on the highway in 100-degree weather, I spent an afternoon eating hamburgers, shooting guns, and blowing shit up with bags of tannerite on some random DOD employee's woodland property. Don't remember your name, dude, but you were the man. Thanks for a great memory. When I was learning to fly at a sketchy flight school, I was doing a pre-flight check flight, close to the end of the program. I was doing the run-up in a Cessna, when I smelt something. "Do you smell that?" "Smells like gas," I says. Instructor, 21 years old, shrugs, annoyed. I open the door, and there is a spreading puddle of AV gas under the plane. Shit. The instructor panics. "Stay in the plane, I'll get help," and runs off. As soon as I got the engine off, I nipped out of there and watched the plane dump all its fuel on the runway. They kindly gave me another plane and instructor. They fixed their plane, and a month later, I read about the same plane crashing due to fuel issues, 1 fatality. No significant repercussions for company. A little while back, my roommate was contacted by a wealthy man in the area who wanted to pay her to be his live-in pet for an entire month. She thought that this was a cutesy way of saying that it was a sugar daddy baby arrangement. Turns out what he actually meant was that she would be given room, board, and a very healthy allowance to spend a large portion of her day dressed as a cat, walking on her hands and knees, eating out of a bowl, using a litter box, and, yes, sleeping in a little cage at night. Sex wasn't even on the table. He was only interested in having a human cat for a month. She seriously considered the offer for a weekend, and then politely declined. Edit. This allowance would have covered her college tuition for the semester. He knew what he wanted and was very motivated. My dad went to secondary school with John Lennon and was a couple years older than him. Dad was known for playing the drums and being quite musical, and one day John asks him whether he'd like to be the drummer in a band he's forming. Dad was keen, but my granny said he needed to prioritize studying, and so he didn't join. The band formed and were called the Quarrymen. And I think a guy called Colin was the drummer instead of Dad, who I believe was later replaced by Pete Best and then Ringo as they changed to the Silver Beatles, and then the Beatles. I like to imagine that in an alternative universe, my dad said yes, and that was history. I don't even mind that I wouldn't have been born if this had been the outcome. He really deserved to have had that lifetime. Don't know how interesting it is, but a few years ago I'd go to college in the morning and leave at like midnight, because I didn't have a PC and needed to work on homework at school. One time on the last train ride home, I had to catch 2 trains and 2 buses each way to get there and back. We were coming into the last station where I'd get off. There was this Asian guy acting a bit strange the whole ride. He gets up and stands in the middle of the car, and as the train brakes coming into the station, he falls flat on his face from a full standing position. Lays there until the train stops, stands up, dusts himself off, and walks out of the open doors like nothing happened. I saw this guy doing it like 5 other separate times, and since I was used to it at that point, I enjoyed looking out for the uninitiated riders' reactions. Plenty more slightly weird stuff happened on my late night subway rides home. I really enjoyed the entertainment. I was an exchange student in Poland a few years ago. I was freshly 18 and had almost no experience with alcohol. 3rd week of school, we had a dance, and I decided to attend. It was not at all like the school dances we have in the US. First off, it was held at a club, downtown. Little odd, but okay. Second, it had a bar. I was in the senior class in high school, and we were all 18, so we could drink. I was not ready for that at all. Third, I had just started smoking the week before. My high school had a smoking gazebo, and probably 1/3 of my class smoked. I started smoking to make friends lol. This turned into the perfect storm of me getting absolutely fucking shit-faced. After blacking out shortly, I was suddenly outside smoking, and my friends and I were walking to a nearby 24 Hours liquor store. I walked in, visibly inebriated, and bought a mid-sized bottle of vodka. The cashier was hesitant, but when she heard I was American, basically just said, "Fuck it, go ham." Probably another 2 hours, and another blackout later the police arrive. They start yelling at my class president for wandering in the road. For some reason drunk me decides I should get involved, even though I barely speak Polish and am super fucking wasted. I walk up to the cop, and in the worst Polish I've ever spoken, tried to say, "Leave him alone." But what came out was "leave." And then a pile of vomit all over his boots. Oh fuck, this is it, I thought. I'm going to get arrested and deported. The cop looked at me and said in English, "You an American?" "Yes, sir," I replied, knowing I was in deep shit. The cop looked me up and down, looked at the bottle of vodka in my hand, and said, "You drink shit vodka? Come with me." I was put into the back of the police car, and he started to drive away. My heart sank. 3 weeks into what was supposed to be the best year of my life, it was already over. But he stopped 2 blocks away, at the 24 Hours liquor store, brought me inside, and bought me a 100 milliliters bottle of Zubrowka vodka. He said, "This is good and cheap. Welcome to Poland. Now let me take you back to your friends." As we pulled back up to the club, he leaned back and said, "Watch this." He turned on the lights and siren, and 3 or 4 kids ran down the block. He was laughing uncontrollably. He unlocked the door, and as I climbed out, he shouted, "Be safe, friend." 20 minutes later I blacked out again. And the next thing I remembered was waking up on the kitchen floor of the house I was living in, feeling like absolute shit. My host mother had made coffee and said, "Damn, you had a night, huh?" And that was the craziest night I ever had. Sorry for formatting. I'm pretty shit at it. I work in a prison as a nurse. Frequently, our inmates insert beads, usually carved from dominoes, under the skin of their penis shaft. It's called beading, and it happens a lot. Pretty much every unit has a dick doctor, another inmate, who is particularly skilled in flaying open dicks and sticking beads inside of them. Or, some inmates say, "Fuck it," and try to do it themselves. We had an inmate who cut himself shaving. Yeah, okay. Who had to come up to the medical department because his genitalia was bleeding. Obviously, everyone's first thought is the dude was either trying to put in a bead or take one out, and failed. So dude gets up to us and he's holding a towel down his pants, against his crotch, and everything is soaked in blood. Underwear, towel, pants, you got it. Drenched. So I take him into an exam room and get his clothes off, and the dude goes, "It's mostly okay. I stitched it back up myself with my sewing kit." What? Yeah. He stitched his own cock up with a fucking sewing kit from commissary. Not only that, but he tied a string around his shaft as a makeshift tourniquet. I go, hey, you might want to take that string off of your dick before it loses circulation and falls off. Anyway, we get the tourniquet off, and I take out his shitty stitches, and he starts spurting blood from his dick like an active volcano. I've never seen so much blood come from a human being before. We had to burn his cock shot with silver nitrate. It was awesome. I loved bead stories. When I was 22, I had an internship for the Buffalo Wild Wings marketing department. I was also running a lot at this time. Every time I would go and leave for a run, I would text my girlfriend that I'm leaving for a run just so someone knows where I am. I get a text from her mid-run, asking for a special picture when I get back. I agree. Then I get a text from my female boss, making sure I sent out some paperwork, which I did. I get home, and I don't even want to take this stupid fucking picture. Just want to shower. But I get butt-ass naked and take a bathroom mirror selfie, from head to kneecap, and send it with a kiss face emoji. An hour later I get a text from my girlfriend that says, "Did you forget my special picture?" And I'm thinking, no, what the fuck, I sent that. So I go into my texts and, oh no. Oh fuck. Fuck me into oblivion. No. I sent the nude to my boss. My heart sank straight into hell. I immediately tried to do damage control and say it was not meant for her, and that I'm so sorry. I even screenshotted the convo from my girlfriend to show it was a mistake. No response. Went into the office the next day and was called into HR where I was fired. Shit fucking sucked. I had a great gig going. Makes for a great story though. This happened in either the late 90s or early 2000s. So my granddad got jiggy with another woman when he was on holiday once, with a lady from Kiribati. Anyway, it produced a child, my aunt. Now several years ago, my family decided that we would go and visit her in Kiribati. For those that don't know, it's on the equator. To get there we had to fly from Fiji on a tiny 50-seater twin-prop plane with one toilet at the front. Now, being a kid with a lot of food allergies, I had eaten something that didn't quite sit right. Mild case of food poisoning, if you will. About half an hour into our flight, my stomach gives me that feeling where you know you won't stop what's coming. So I got up and went to the toilet. Halfway up the aisle all hell broke loose. I farted, which wasn't a fart. It was the beginnings of full-blown diarrhea. By the time I got into the toilet and locked the door, my eyes were soaked. It was still flowing. I couldn't stop it. Now I was a good kid, so I didn't want to block the toilet. So I threw my eyes in the rubbish and unloaded into the toilet. However, the amount that came out plus the amount of paper I had to use ended up blocking the toilet anyway, and it stunk really badly. I would have been in there for a good 15 minutes. Meanwhile, the entire plane started stinking of shit. I finished up and cleaned up best I could, but the toilet was done for. It was starting to overflow. I just slowly went back to my seat, with the entire plane staring at me. Disclaimer: back in the day, there was a small amount of water with chemicals to flush with, much more than there is today. A blocked opening means that there's nowhere for the poo to go, and no vacuum to suck the shit down. Because it's blocked, the more you press the lever, the more chemicals, been saying water as it was faster to type, get pumped in. With the toilet blocked, there's nowhere for it to go except overflow. Now imagine the amount of paper I had to use to block an airplane toilet. And that's why it was blocked. I had to tell my dad what I had done, and he spoke to the flight attendants, who had to try clear the mess of a toilet with the water starting to splash onto the floor. It was horrible. We finally got to Kiribati, and the plane had to be grounded while they disinfected and cleaned the whole plane, as it started to sweat. As soon as the heat from outside came in, the plane was delayed for a good while. I only remember this as my dad brought it up the other day in convo. He thought I put my eyes in the toilet which blocked it. I had to assure him it was all TP and shit. So long, didn't read, shit myself on a plane, and made it get delayed. When I was about 10, my family moved from the city to this small, like a few hundred residents, town in northern Australia. We started going to school, and after a few weeks we made friends with the other kids. They kept telling us about this club in town, called the Nature Rangers. The way they described it, it sounded like some off-brand Boy Scouts with camping and hiking and all that. They also said they gathered at their Ranger Hall on Fridays to have movie nights with popcorn and hot dogs. Me and my younger sister begged our parents to let us join, so on Friday night we got dropped off at the hall. So we lined to go into the hall, and all the kids are joking and laughing. They open the doors, and then we all start walking in, and the whole mood shifted. All the kids immediately shut up. As I walked in I looked up, and on the walls were all these signs. Sinners must burn, the devil is coming for you. Christ is your only savior. Stuff like that. The one that stood out was this huge mural of Australia engulfed in flames, with only our northern town spared. It was an eye-opener for us, city kids. What happened next got weirder. It was something you see in movies about fanticles in the deep south of America. We sang these weird folk songs, listened to fire and brimstone sermons. We had to give our faith to the Lord Jesus. The one song that stuck out years later went, "He's under my feet, he's under my feet, Satan is under my feet." The song was accompanied with a dance we had to learn. Me and my sister were looking at each other like, when is this going to be over? Then after all of that, we were ushered outside. The boys and girls were separated. The girls were to stay at the hall, but the boys were off to go with this creepy-looking old guy, who they called Brother Joseph. He was getting all the boys to get into his white van to take them for a drive. That's when I knew that enough was enough. I snuck out of the line, and silently got my sister, and said we are going. By this time it was late at night, so we snuck off into the dark. Our home was on the other side of town, so we slowly made our way home, creeping from yard to yard. Every time we saw car lights we hid in trees or bushes. When we got about half a kilometer from home, I told my sister to leg it, and we sprinted the whole way home, burst into our house, and proceeded to tell our parents the whole thing. They always say they had never seen us so scared. It's a story we laugh about at the time, but at the time it was dodgy as fuck. We lived in that town for another 3 months, and the other kids never mentioned Nature Rangers to us ever again. My father used to live in Kazakhstan, round 2006. One day, he was with his work friend at a bar when this tall, built Russian man comes in. He decides he wants to sit on a bar stool close to my dad, but instead of finding a normal, empty stool he goes to a chair occupied by a small woman, and literally throws her off the chair, exclaiming that he wanted that chair. My dad sees this and immediately attempts to intervene by saying, "Hey man, what the fuck are you doing?" The Russian man then proceeds to tell my dad, "I'm going to kick the shit out of you when you leave the bar, etc." My father brushes it off, but then he notices that the Russian man's friends have started to join them, about 4 large men inside and another 4 outside. At this point my dad is nervous and decides to call the head of security, hose, for the company he works for. Keep in mind my dad was the managing director of Kazakhstan at the time. The host tells my dad wait at the bar for him to come, and after some tense drinking with the work buddy, 30-some bodyguards start pouring into the bar, making a line from my dad to the exit of the bar. Because of the country they are in, the bodyguards all have pistols on them as well, so the 30-something bodyguards have made a wall of people either side of my father. After the host takes him to his car, but there was an additional 2 black BMWs that were there to escort my dad home. Not the most insane story, but it was insane to hear my dad tell it to me. He also said the urge to flip off the big Russian guys was massive, but he didn't want to risk it. I'm a pretty avid cyclist, which means whenever I have the time, I will ride my bike away from the city I live in, into the mountainous suburbs to challenge myself up some of the local climbs. It was another one of these excursions. I had just rode up and down a big-ass mountain on the road headed back to the city centre. I was fairly tired, still had 40 kilometers to get back home. All of a sudden, I see traffic on the opposite lane stopped for some reason. What I immediately saw next I was not prepared for. I saw an ostrich on my lane, in front of me, running after the car ahead. What the fuck? It's not like the country I live in is habitat to any ostriches. Slowly, I follow the ostrich, which is running after the car ahead, faced with a decision. Do I overtake the ostrich? Now I'm no expert on ostriches, but I do remember reading that ostriches run really quickly, and that they can be aggressive towards humans. I don't want to become the victim of an ostrich attack, but I do want to get home quickly, as it was starting to get dark. After hesitating for a while, gave it all I had and overtook the ostrich. The rest isn't that interesting. I managed to get home unharmed, but to this day, it remains one of my most surreal experiences, running into an ostrich on a bike ride. When my mom was pregnant with me, she and my father divorced, and he gave up all parental rights. I've never met him or spoken to him. I've only seen a few pictures. About 2 years ago, I worked at a healthcare facility, where I would float to different offices around the county based on who needed the help. This one particular morning, I was checking the doctor's schedule and saw my father's name. He was scheduled to be in the office next door to where I was working, and I thought it was pretty crazy, but I most likely wouldn't even see him. The time of his appointment came, and he walked into my office, straight up to me, and says he had a doctor's appointment with Dr. X. My heart was racing cause I knew it was him. As soon as he walked through the door, I told him Dr. X was the office next door, and he left. A little while later, I walked over to the other office to deliver some faxes, and on my way out, he trailed behind me, and I held the door for him. He said thank you, and that was my one and only interaction with my father in my 30 years of living.